Gavin Ellis is here right now. Good morning to you.
Good morning,
Does that
Catherine.
not happen with blokes? Do you always understand exactly what you meant?
No. and I'm below 1.8, one
you?
son. But I've got two grandsons. Does that count?
Well, no. Your son's on track, but anyway, let's get away from that.
We tried.
I'm a complete failure on that front, so there you go. Anyway, growing disquiet in Europe over reporting of terrorist incidents. I'm interested in where they're coming from on this. Is it a case of stop turning every individual who callously kills someone into some kind of international global story? What is it?
It's that, but not only that. The growing concern in not only in Britain but in Europe and in the United States too is sort of two sides of a coin, Catherine. On the one hand, yes, it's the perceived glorification of the terrorists. You know, you make them notorious, and that's exactly what they wanted to achieve. They wanted notoriety, and the media give it to them. That's one side of the coin. The other side of the coin, and this is one that perhaps is socially even more of a problem, is the way in which jihadist terrorists, or so-called, and I don't like using this term, radical Islamic, because I don't think they are. I think that they are the misusers of one of the world's great religions, but the way that they are portrayed as being tied inexorably to Islam is creating in the general population an anti-Islamic feeling. And last week in Brussels there were two meetings, and at these meetings, one of the things that they noted was that after every terrorist attack involving these IS terrorists, there was a spike in both anti-Muslim hate speech and hate crime, if you like, actions against Muslim members of the local population. So these two meetings aimed at trying to find ways of altering the way that the terrorist activities are reported. Now, there are difficulties here, and the Ethical Journalism Network, their director, Aidan White, summed it up quite well, because on the one hand, they want to prevent the growth of hate speech intentionally or unintentionally through the way that media report terrorist activities. But on the other hand, they don't want to unnecessarily constrain the right of people to know. So it's a very fine balance about how they achieve both of those aims. Now, there was a very, very good blog by Philip Sieb, who's professor of journalism at the Annenberg School in America, where he said that the part of the problem is that the approach of the media generally is a very simplistic one, and they treat these acts of terrorism in the same way that they would treat a car crash or a fire, you know, a breaking news event, but they don't contextualise it. They don't give any of the underlying detail that would provide proper context for these acts of terrorism.
The question is whether they should lead global news stories at all, because you mentioned the fire or the car crash. If there's a fire or a car crash involving one person in rural France, it's not going to lead our news bulletins.
No.
Ditto, if one person grabs a hammer and assaults another person in the United States, it's not going to lead our news bulletins, unless, of course, that person is yelling words that might lead one to conclude sympathies for whatever they've been doing online and whether they've been radicalised online. I think the bigger argument is all the credit that gets given to so-called IS because someone's been watching YouTube videos and gone out and committed a violent act. That's
a point that Philip Sieb makes, that you have these wrong-headed people who just pick up on the IS label, if you like, and claim them to be jihadis. And I think you're right that the exposure that they get is out of proportion, perhaps, to the extent of if we look at it in its narrow sense, the crime. But when you have 20 or 30 people killed, the media have got no choice but to cover it. But what they do need to do is to put some context behind it, and also to stop using some of the phrases like "this is for Allah." Well, it's not for Allah any more than a Christian lunatic standing up and saying this is for God. We would treat that, as the statement of a lunatic.
Mental illness.
Yeah,
basically.
That's right. And this is no different. So
it's difficult though, because it is the means by which this organisation tries to inspire acts. Clearly the whole issue of online radicalisation or mobilisation to commit violence is a contemporary problem. I agree with you. You can't ignore when 20 or 30 people are killed, young people are killed at a concert. But the way we tend to shorthand run straight away to terror, which it is. I mean, any violent act hurting a lot of people is terror. And then within 5 seconds, you're bound to hear IS claiming responsibility for the attack. Go get lost. Why are we reporting that? They can claim any old thing.
That's right.
And it's these shorthand responses that need modification and contextualising.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's another meeting in Europe next week, organised by the Council of Europe in Strasbourg, that is going to address those very issues and the way in which the media report the initial event and then the ongoing aftermath. So maybe out of this might come some guidelines that one hopes will proliferate and try to bring more balance into the argument, and in particular to stop this tendency to vilify Islam and local Muslims in Europe are starting to really feel the effect of this.
I've seen the flip side of that. I've seen both cases. One case in the Manchester case was the report of the guy who was in an Uber and said, "Stop, you're all the same, look what you're doing to our country," and got out. That was one. The other thing I recall seeing was a peaceful public vigil the day after those attacks, where a man, I'm presuming, is Muslim. That was the reason the camera was on him and the reason that this was being shown, was up, standing up and shaking hands and making contact with everyone at that gathering, saying, "This is not in our name." That's what I took from the reporting, right? So you can see
there should be more
both sides of it.
That's right.
I think the more difficult thing is not to normalise these violent acts, but we are lumping them together under a particular activity that does nothing more than encourage the next individual to go grab the nearest thing at hand and do the same thing. And that is what the difficult balance is.
Yeah, and that's where we have to get really some cogent guidelines that everybody starts to follow, so that we start to get a uniformity of coverage that does not serve the interests of these lunatics.
PwC's latest forecast on what's happening in the world media from a business perspective. Is it more bad news?
It seems to be every year, doesn't it? The PwC Global Entertainment and Media Forecast now goes out to 2021. And as expected, the traditional media here in the New Zealand survey don't do very well again. And overall, if we go out the full 5 years, newspapers are really at the blunt end of the stick, I would say, yet again, although below the global average of decline, I have to say, and generally speaking, all of the traditional media, radio, television, magazines, newspapers, although they're either flatlining or not growing very much, they tend to be still better than the global average. Not as good as Australia, which is a bigger economy, but certainly in terms of the global trends, we're not doing quite as bad. But the interesting thing is the areas that are doing really well and are expected to do very well, unfortunately, none of them really is in the area of news media. The biggest growth is expected to be in internet video, which will grow by more than 15% over that 5-year period, way above the global average and indeed above Australia. I think probably because they're more mature markets. But this is the Netflix phenomenon, if you like, and that and video games are expected to be real growth areas. And the unfortunate thing from our point of view, as thinking as journalists, is that the growth seems to be in the entertainment rather than the news media side of things. So not good news, but perhaps not as bad as it could have been if we look at it in a global context.
Video game journalism, why not? I can think of a colleague who would
of course, one
be
of the
right
things,
into that. It's giving me high five as we speak.
It could be virtual reality journalism, which is something that is on the cards. Who knows?
I'm a total convert. When they predicted the 9 planets from that video, what was the name of that video game, William? The Elite Dangerous. When they predicted the 9 planets from this incredibly sophisticated video game, that was my final conversion towards the benefits of gaming. So there you go.
I'm afraid I'm a novice.
We'll send you the link.
Pac-Man was about my limit.
Well, hey, that's all right. 2 expert panels are reasonably upbeat about New Zealand media's ability to hold fake news at bay.
Yeah, that's right. I chaired a panel in the Auckland Writers' Festival and another one at Auckland University last week on fake news and our upcoming general election. And Corin Dan from TVNZ and Mark Jennings, who was head of news at TV3, now, of course, co-founder of Newsroom, both of them felt that the expertise that is in our newsrooms should be sufficient to filter out fake news when it presents itself. Not quite so upbeat when it comes to social media, where they believe that there is a strong possibility of fake news both being generated and proliferating through social media. But others, Chloe Swarbrick, the Green candidate, was one of the panellists on last week, and she made the point about this being a clickbait environment and the propensity for news to be generated on the basis of its likelihood to generate clicks, and the possibility that could be a way into mainstream news media. But generally speaking, the consensus seems to be that large scale, the big lie, is unlikely to get generated here, certainly in mainstream media during our election campaign, but people need to be really vigilant in terms of what they see and what they share in social media.
I'm just thinking of the last election campaign. Could it have been any wackier if it was fake news?
We've just given it a different name, haven't we?
It was a wild ride.
Yeah.
All right. Hey, thank you so much, as always. Gavin Ellis, our media commentator.